Well, hey folks, when the Letters from Chad project launched back in September of 2025, convicted killer Chad Daybell tried to rebrand himself as a persecuted prophet, writing from his death row cell in Idaho, preaching innocence between the lines of his letters. But the words that were supposed to save his image, I think did something entirely different. They exposed him. And I want to walk through the full timeline of these letters just quickly while we wait for letter number 8, which hasn't been coming like promised. We're going to talk about the psychology behind Chad's need to control the narrative and how narcissistic offenders weaponize faith and what this silence really means for his legal strategy. Because make no mistake about the silence, it isn't a sign of redemption. It's a moment of recalibration. And when the next revelation comes, it'll be scripted, it'll be strategic, it'll be manipulative. We'll also examine how his words are impacting the families of JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan, Tammy Daybell, Charles Vallow, Brandon Bedreau, and why the world should never forget that behind Chad Daybell's spiritual spin lies the real human tragedy. And then I'm going to share why I believe that Chad's personality isn't going to allow him to stay silent. The prophet might be grounded for now, but he's still trying to fly that same broken plane. Well, hey folks, welcome to Profiling Evil. I'm Mike King, and tonight we're going to step back into the strange universe of Chad Daybell, the self-styled end-of-times guide who thought that a few letters from death row could rebaptize his public image. Now, if you're new here, I hope you'll hit the like and subscribe button and ring that bell so that you don't miss our breakdowns. And for the rest of you longtime sleuths, grab your Diet Dr. Pepper and let's dig in, because I want to talk about when the letters started, why they stopped, and what they revealed about Chad's personality structure, and why that quiet that we're going through right now isn't repentance, in my opinion. It's repositioning. Now, for those of you who know me, my voice sounds a little bit raspy. I've been fighting with a little bit of infection that has created a growth on the side of my neck that I'm going to go in and have removed. It's about a 2-inch mass. Hopefully it's not going to be anything, but it might be my last video for a short time while I work through this surgery and get things back to normal. So be patient with my voice as I go through this. But I wanted to step inside Chad Daybell's mind, the wacky ritual crime marketing department that this guy's running from inside his death row prison cell. Picture this. Deep inside his mind, there's a little tiny office. It's even smaller than the cell block he's sitting in. Maybe there are fluorescent lights flickering as Chad stares at the stark prison walls that surround him. His sleeves are rolled up and there are papers everywhere as he continues trying to spin this disaster that he's created into some form of righteous destiny. Now, taped to the walls are 7 tattered pages, pinned like trophies across the back. These are his so-called letters from Chad. Now, in letter number 7, he promised another letter very soon. It hasn't happened. In fact, he's gone dark or quiet. But that's his trophy wall, so to speak. But he has a major problem. Every letter that he's penned from prison has landed like a lead balloon. His plan is performing worse than a flaming enemy bomber that's being shot down during World War II. You remember the videos? His strategy, like a sinking ship, is doomed. And what's really tragic is, like those aviators and sailors that were trapped on board my examples that I gave, Chad Daybell is willing to take anybody who will listen to him on his nosedive, all the way down to the bottom. Now, his goal in producing letter number 1 was to introduce you to him, Chad Daybell, the humble servant of God, his God, who believed he is wrongfully accused. Well, instead, the letter introduced a self-proclaimed prophet who sounds like he's auditioning for sainthood in a budget film. Letter number 2 followed pretty quickly with promised revelations, but it ended up delivering Chad's form of rationalization. Letter 3 crash landed like the first two, especially after Chad took that nosedive where he blamed Tammy's death on her health, instead of acknowledging that it was by his own murderous deceit. But he couldn't stop there. He penned letters 4, 5, and 6, continuing this writing campaign of offense and delusion. And when letter number 7 rolled around, I think even his most patient readers were saying what we've all been thinking for years, and that is, Chad, stop talking and just go away. Well, if you're interested, here's what I think is happening inside Chad Daybell's mental marketing office. That place where panic is surely setting in, because the doomsday minions must be scrambling to somehow resurrect this guy's reputation. A reputation that's turned into a public relations nightmare. And it's also an irresistible inferno of curiosity for those of us that keep wondering, what's this guy gonna do next? And I hope, if you haven't seen my letters 1 through 7, where I review those, that you'll go back and review each of those. So in Chad Daybell's prison incarcerated mind, I think he's leaning on some kind of an imaginary intern. Maybe somebody he calls Brother Irrelevant Spin, who knows? But Spin is frantically suggesting taglines like faith over forensics, or hey, join the 144,000, minus the bad press, of course. But nothing is working so far. And every slogan he's spun seems to be backfiring. His attempts at spiritual rebranding are only reminding people that Chad Daybell is a convicted child killer. He's a convicted wife killer, and he's sitting on death row in an Idaho prison. His prophetic brand is toxic, and his celestial publicists are running for the exits. Yet there he sits, head in hand, wondering, how on earth did I lose control of the narrative? How did I, the chosen one, become the condemned one? And what could I possibly write that will make anybody believe in me again? You can almost hear the turbulence in his thoughts. Those engines of manipulation are failing, and smoke is pouring out of his wings of delusion. This guy was once soaring at 30,000 feet with blue skies surrounding him, but his world has changed, and he's losing altitude quickly. And regardless, he continues to clutch his notebook in hand, hoping to somehow convince the world, perhaps even himself, that he's not crashing, he's only testing his faith. Well, in Chad Daybell's mind, every setback might be a revelation, knowing that every rejection is persecution in his mind, and that every disaster is proof that he was right all along. This guy might go down in flames, but he might think it's supposed to happen. But as he does go down in flames, even the self-proclaimed prophet knows that his spin isn't working. His congregation has changed the channel, and the narrative that he built on control, I think it's collapsing under the weight of reality. And that's where we land today, because behind the ashes of this failed PR campaign lies something far more revealing. It's the psychology of a man who can't stop trying to sell his own redemption, even when nobody's buying it. So let's quickly revisit when the letters began, and let's think about where Chad the manipulator is today, including whether he's running out of believers. If we go back in time, his first public letter landed in early September of 2025, and it read like a sermon written for the faithful and the curious. If you remember, he said, quote, "This is Chad Daybell, writing to you from my cell," close quote. I mean, it was polished, it was pious, and it was carefully framed. He emphasized a peaceful spirit, a devotion to faith, a holier than thou. And he emphasized the suggestion that the world just doesn't understand him. They can't understand him because he's not of this world. And that opening matters so much because it tells you who the intended audience is. He isn't writing to investigators of his beliefs. He's writing to the victims' families, to the court, to others like you and me who don't believe his garbage. He's writing the only congregation he has left, anybody that's willing to entertain his preferred myth over the public record, backed by science and backed by a jury's conviction. As the second and third letters follow, a clearer pattern starts emerging. He recasts the past with a gentle certainty and kind of selective memories. He gestures us toward innocence without engaging the facts that convicted him. He floats explanations for Tammy's death, things that happen to conflict with the forensic narrative and with science that she was strangled. Now, this wasn't a confession. It's a curation. It's a spin. Think of it as a narrative laundering where you take dirty truths, you run it through a cycle of spiritual language, and you hope it comes out wearable somehow. And from a profiling angle, the act of writing these letters checks all the classic boxes for narcissistic and manipulative offenders. There's grandiosity. Remember, I'm not as you've heard. I'm special, chosen, misunderstood. There's control in his commentary when he says things like, "The court took my liberty, but I still control the story." There's moral elevation where he says, "I forgive the world for not seeing the light." Now that last one is a favorite of mine. He feigns generosity, which stands as a velvet glove over the iron fist of superiority. He doesn't apologize, he blesses. He doesn't reflect, he refrains. And he doesn't acknowledge harm. He casts himself as the wounded shepherd. Now, for people who study cult dynamics, it's a familiar theater with an overused script. The leader's identity is inseparable from attention. He needs an audience to exist at full strength. If he can't preach in public, this guy is going to preach on paper. If he can't gather people in a chapel, he's going to gather us online through a family-curated platform run by his daughter. And if you've ever wondered why this format is so attractive to fallen leaders, it's pretty simple. Letters are the perfect illusion of intimacy. You'll feel like you're hearing the real man, unfiltered. But in reality, it's the most filtered medium that he's got to work with. And when he fails to move the negativity needle after 7 letters, he resorts to silence in mid to late September. No formal announcements, no farewell tour. The website stops posting and the public doesn't get an explanation. And on its face, it looks like a withdrawal. But in the psychology of control, silence can be a tactic. You see, when the message isn't landing, when the would-be prophet realizes that his audience isn't the adorning group that he'd hoped for, but they're outraged, he doesn't convert, he recalibrates. And that recalibration is exactly what's going on right now, in my opinion. And he does this for practical reasons. Now, it might be that legal teams, those who hate unpredictable variables, might say, hey, back off. There may be an inmate publishing commentary going on that we're not aware of, or contested facts that are creating more risk than reward during a death penalty appeal that he's got coming up. Prison systems scrutinize communications, particularly when they inflame the public or appear to manipulate third parties. And then there's the family dimension. In this one, there's a relative functioning as the conduit. The blowback doesn't just strike the inmate, though. It strikes the entire household. Sometimes the pressure outside the walls is the quickest way to shut down a campaign inside the prison. Which leaves us to stepping back from the timeline and asking a bigger question.
This is a letter I believe Chad Daybell might write next. A letter that tries to reclaim control of a crumbling narrative. He's sitting in that Idaho cell, staring at those 7 letters taped to the wall, realizing every word he released was a misfire. The following is how I imagine he might spin letter number 8. Not because it's true, but because it fits the psychology of a man who cannot afford to admit he was wrong.
My dear friends and seekers of truth, the last few months have tested my spirit in ways I could never have imagined. I've read the cruel things people have said about me, the mockery, the judgment, the twisting of my words. But I've also felt the warmth of those who still know the real me, that others are too distracted to hear. I know the world is angry. I know they want a monster, and I've made it easy for them. I have sat here in silence praying as the media builds their golden calf of outrage. But in this place, under the hum of fluorescent light, I've remembered who I am. They think my silence means defeat, but it's only reflection. Sometimes calls his servants to stillness, not because he's abandoned them, but because he's preparing them. I'm being refined, not rejected. Many have said my letters were delusion, that I was rewriting history. But those who know how the adversary works understand the truth is always mocked before it is revealed. Tammy was a saint. I have said that from the beginning. But I also said she was weary. What husband, seeing his wife struggling, wouldn't wish her peace? That's not guilt, that's compassion. Yet they twist even mercy into motive. I hear their laughter about prophecies and zombies, as if faith itself were insanity. They mock what they don't understand. I was never trying to lead people into madness. I was trying to wake them from it. Do I regret the pain that has come to families? Of course. My heart aches for everyone caught in the whirlwind. But storms are not created by the man holding the umbrella. Sometimes they're sent to reveal who's strong enough to stand. I've been called manipulative, controlling, dangerous. Maybe that's because truth does control. It changes people, and people resist change. One day, everything will be revealed, not by me, but by a higher hand. When that day comes, I pray those who laughed will find humility, and those who doubted will remember that prophets have always been misunderstood. Until then, I will continue to write, teach, to prepare, because light doesn't apologize for shining, even when it blinds those who hide in darkness. In faith, Chad.
Now, if you listen closely, that letter isn't about remorse. It's about reframing. It's classic narcissistic damage control, a man trying to spiritualize his failures into martyrdom. Every accusation becomes persecution. Every fact becomes a test of faith. What Chad's really doing here is psychological sleight of hand. He's pulling focus away from the victims, JJ, Tylee, Tammy, and Charles, and turning himself back into the main character. That's what narcissistic offenders do. They don't seek forgiveness, they seek followers. So if a letter number 8 ever surfaces, don't expect confession. Expect correction, not of truth, but of image. Because in Chad Daybell's mind, the story of his redemption is still being written. He just needs an audience willing to read it.
Why on earth is Chad Daybell writing these letters? And I think the answer is that he truly believes that his writing is going to somehow restore the illusion of authority that he thinks he has. He can't author his environment, places where every day is now controlled by prison staff. His movements are directed, and his horizon, it's filled with cement and razor wire. But through these letters, he can still author a world where he's central, where he's the chosen one, and where he's vindicated. That's got to be his dopamine right now. And it's not just getting attention, it's also about getting coherence. Because his story about himself has to be grand enough to hold the contradictions of real life, what really came out, up. Because reality intrudes on his made-up persona. And that's why he keeps telling us that we're wrong about him and that our errors are excusable because we're unenlightened. And how does he know that we're unenlightened? Because he's the enlightened one, and he's extending his graciousness to each of us. He's the self-proclaimed prophet, and he's a performer. You know, I often tell audiences that cult leaders are the first and last of performers. They exist on a stage, even if the stage in his case is a steel bunk and a sheet of ruled paper. His letters are a set piece, handwritten revelation, celestial footnotes, a chorus of piety. If this were a revival meeting, we'd get a sign-up card and we'd be passing around a donation plate for Chad. It's the same dynamic, but different ushers. And if you want a little gallows humor to keep you sane, in the Church of Chad Daybell, the sacrament is self-pity and amnesia. And the hymn of the day is Amazing Place, How Sweet My Spin. You know, it's important, educationally, to separate silence from remorse, because remorse is reflective and it's other-oriented. It seeks to center the victim where it needs to be and to remove the offender from the spotlight. So tactical silence becomes self-protective and future-oriented. It seeks to protect the offender's options for tomorrow's performance. And everything that we're seeing in Chad Daybell's written posture is consistent with the latter. He's setting us up for tomorrow. When the feedback loop punishes rather than praises, the predator has to retreat into the wings, adjust the lighting, and wait for a better cue. And that's not growth, folks. It's rehearsal. So if you're looking forward to the same behavioral logic, if you're looking forward to understanding the next movement from Chad Daybell, I'll tell you, in my opinion, it's going to be a controlled re-entry. It might look like a calmer, more devotional tone, fewer facts and more faith. It could come through a family statement that reframes the project as a ministry rather than advocacy. It could even appear as a leak, which keeps the engine warm without the formal liability of an official post coming out. So watch for softer phrasing and bigger claims. Watch for humility on the surface, backed by superiority between the lines. Because I think we're going to hear Chad talk about peace and about prayer, maybe even about the burden of being misunderstood. Chad Daybell might use letter number 8 to bless the people who disagree with him. That'll be the signal, because this style of manipulation is how you put your opponents beneath you while you try to sound kind. And if and when the letters resume, I hope you'll read them like a profiler would. Look for what's not being said, not just what he's delivering. Ask who the true audience is in this. And look for the pronoun games that are going to shift blame into abstractions and track distance between words that sound like apology to words that function like absolution. Listen for spiritual language doing legal work. And please keep the victims centered in your thoughts. Any communication Chad Daybell offers, anything that seeks to erase the victims or evidence, is just an illusion. And it's all backed by better lighting. So for those of you who follow process, it's worth understanding how inmates' communications intersect with appeals. The appellate strategy thrives on a tight record and controlled messaging. Extrajudicial statements, especially those that torch the facts found in conviction, can complicate arguments, can inflame public opinion, and can even draw disciplinary review within the institution. So in the calculus of survival, silence buys time. But I don't expect that Chad Daybell is going to remain quiet for very long. Now, I've had some of you write and ask me if I think Chad Daybell believes his own narrative. In my experience, belief and strategy are not mutually exclusive. He might actually believe that his God chose him. He's going to continue to lie if it helps his cause. This is the kind of predator who can hold a private apocalypse in one hand and a public relations plan in the other. And I think you're seeing the public relations plan. You see, the danger isn't just that he believes these extreme things. The danger is that he used those beliefs to reduce other human beings to obstacles. Then he wrapped the harm that he caused inside of Scripture. And that's not faith. That's weaponized ideology and the sign of a cult leader. Men like Chad Daybell, they don't retire from the spotlight. They relocate it. The letters stopped because the heat got too high and the risks were even higher. His ego needs to be seen as chosen, and his reflex to manipulate doesn't evaporate just because his daughter's website goes quiet. So keep your eyes open, folks. When the next revelation appears, we'll dissect it together, line by line, and keep the victims at the center where they belong. So if this review helped you see through some of the stagecraft, perhaps even the witchcraft, hit the like and subscribe button down below and share Profiling Evil with your friends who follow this case. And make sure you're looking for Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And if you like audio podcasts, subscribe to Profiling Evil's audio podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. And make sure that you're entering your comments down below. And watch for my new podcast, Gardens of Evil, on Gamut Podcast Network. Hey folks, share us with your friends. And we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.